Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. I'm Tim Priester with Tim O'Malley from Irish Illustrated. We're joined by John Bryce of Football Scoop, and it is Thursday, February 13th. We are still waiting to hear on what is going to happen with Mike Mickens. A lot of our subscribers are getting a little nervous because he hasn't been named co-defensive coordinator yet, but I guess good news. Yeah, definitely good news. Texas has hired a person for his position, and that's good for Notre Dame. JB, are there some other suitors out there? There probably are.
There certainly have been. Mike Mickens was definitely deep into the mix at Georgia Tech before they went with Blake Gideon, and that's what actually opened up the position at Texas. Texas reached out to Mike Mickens and talked to him. I think that based on the people I talked to, they really liked Mike. Mike is at a pretty advanced salary here at Notre Dame and is in line for a raise and probably that promotion to co-defensive coordinator. So Texas is hiring Mark Orphy from Rutgers. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have Orphy's bio in front of me, but I think he's been in the SEC before in a role at Ole Miss at some point in time, or certainly Lane Kiffin tried to hire Orphy at some point in time. There's still a few random spots out there that Mike Mickens could be involved in. Still some things shaking out. The Saints are still filling out their staff, which could ultimately lead to some additional college openings. So they're getting closer and closer to it being for sure that Mike Mickens is still on the Notre Dame staff when camp opens in about a little over 4 weeks. But just a couple of little things to watch for, and probably some final contract negotiations to hammer out between Mike Mickens and Marcus Freeman and Pete Bavacqua and company.
We probably shouldn't say that he's at the finish line. That didn't work out real
Yeah.
well fairly recently. Tim, what do you think? I mean, I know like the typical comment is should we be nervous as Notre Dame fans? Should Notre Dame be nervous?
I mean, when JB said 4 weeks, that made it sound worse for me than I was thinking. 4 weeks is a long time. I think either on the last podcast, pre-pod or during, we mentioned Tony Alford. Now this is late, but Tony Alford took that Michigan job around March 14th. Um, that's what high-level guys can do is they can move
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah,
I'd be less nervous with the Georgia Tech coordinator position going away in Texas because if you're going to do a lateral move, Texas is the way to do it in terms of recruiting corners and what they already have and just recruiting base whatsoever. And Sarkisian's about as solid as you're going to get right now. And if you're going to take the Georgia Tech defensive coordinator job, you can't blame a guy for moving on to be a defensive coordinator at the
certainly.
ACC level too. So no, this has been only good news. But JB, when he said 4 weeks, that I'll talk
I
about
don't.
how good
Yeah.
news it is in 3 weeks.
Yeah, I don't. And look, I said 4 weeks because that's about when they open camp. I think
Yeah,
around.
no, I know. That's what I realize. It's about when they open camp, and it can keep happening till then.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
can keep happening
So
till then.
you want the Saints staff filled up
Yeah,
with all NFL guys as quickly as possible. Because I know in years past there were some NFL teams that looked at Marty Biaggi, and so I would, that's the only other one at this stage in the game that I would just sort of keep an eye on is Marty Biaggi has been very successful in the SEC. Lane Kiffin tried to keep him when he left Ole Miss to come to Notre Dame, and then obviously, as voted by his peers, not jagaloons like myself, Marty Biaggi is the reigning Football Scoop Special Teams Coordinator of the Year, so he's got some juice to his name. So again, there's Notre Dame is working on contracts. It's handed out some really large contracts, especially to its new running backs coach, and they're trying to get things buttoned down with the rest.
JB and Tim, you guys both know Biaggi well. Tim from the past, JB from late, and he clearly isn't going to be helping out in the secondary anymore with Mickens and Ash there. Is that something where they're going to have to try to figure out exactly where he would like to help out? I mean, I mentioned wide receiver because it's a large position group that he's not going to be helping out at running back either, is my point. But, I think where does Marty Biaggi go from here to accelerate his coaching career? Because defensive backs doesn't make as much sense right now.
Yeah, I guess yeah, Biaggi,
Wide
you almost
receiver?
like
I mean,
tight ends. They already have
tight
somebody with
ends.
the
Yeah,
tight
that's a
end.
good call.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah. Um, it's almost like sometimes you don't want a unit to have too much success because this is exactly what happens in January and February. He had a bunch of success with his fakes and his variations, and it's put him in a really good light.
And he's, it's not the easiest position to be a pioneer, and he's really been a pioneer going all the
Yeah.
way back to his North Texas days. I would say, potentially tight end, as we discussed on a previous podcast,
Right,
TO.
right.
I would also say, I mean, to your point, wide receiver, Notre Dame is replacing its assistant wide receivers coach.
Mhm.
It's Michael Bearden, who's now with the Cleveland Browns. And then they've got a couple of other spots. They need somebody to help with the linebackers from losing Mike Moon. I can't remember if they lost one more analyst. And I think at least one additional analyst has also had an interview with a couple of different MAC programs on the offensive side of the ball. So there's still some spots that Biaggi could potentially slot into to help grow his skill set and to help Notre Dame out in some of those positions. I like the fact that he's eager to grow. He's eager to learn. He wants to get better in every facet, and that's from visiting with special teams coaches around the sport, be it at the college or NFL levels, to visiting with other coaches and volunteering a year ago to try and be involved either with the linebackers or the secondary. And I'm sure he would like an opportunity to similarly grow his skill set in 25.
I wanted to share this, Tim, because I got into the locker room a little bit before on the infamous national championship locker room. I got in there and I was going to talk to I wanted Dembrock specifically, and I saw Coach Biaggi, and I think he was like graciously waiting to talk for me, and I'm like, great job, Coach. I was like, I need to talk to somebody else right now, but that's how Marty is, though. He's always waiting, gracious. He'd be gracious enough to
Yeah.
talk no matter what. But I was like, I don't know, great job. I gotta go talk to somebody else right now because he didn't really have a whole lot of mistakes in the special teams in those last 5
No,
games.
yeah, definitely not. And JB, as you talk about support staff, get ready to write that story when that all settles in.
Yeah, people really like that.
Yep, you're the man for that job. Tim, you, myself, and Drew Mentok picked the top 50 for the season. That tells you how well Notre Dame used their depth because we
Yeah,
needed 50 spots and probably could have gone 55 realistically.
right,
So,
right.
so that was a good sign. Always good to have more contributors than less. We revealed the top 10 this week, and the guy that was listed number 10, where do you think he would have been if Notre Dame played 14 games?
A lot farther back. That's Jaden Greathouse, but I do count the Penn State and Ohio State
Yeah,
game a little
yeah.
heavier than I do say Stanford and Miami of Ohio. So
He might
that
be
goes
too
into my
low at
ratings.
because of the magnitude of those
That
games.
goes into
He
my
might be
ratings
too
system.
low at
But
10.
yeah, he did. He was fantastic in the playoffs. I ended up doing, as people that read it, I used my drive MVP thing a lot throughout there. I mean, when you look at the playoffs, he had almost as many in the 2 games in the playoffs as he did in the regular season. In a 12-game regular season in 2 playoff games, and really a playoff game and a half.
Yeah.
He was fantastic there. So Great House finished well, and the real key is, of course, going forward, not how we rank him, but that he is a clear top 10 Notre Dame player next year.
We had our composite. I don't remember where I put Don Schuler, but he ranked ninth on our list, and I would argue he should be higher because he was good from the outset. Now Drake Bowen finished very strong. There's no doubt about it, but I'm not sure that he started the season rolling like a Don Schuler. I don't
Yeah,
know
you
where I
had
had him.
Schuler.
I'd
Let's see.
probably
You had Schuler the highest.
okay.
You had Schuler Bowen. I had Bowen Schuler.
Okay.
And Drew. He actually fell a little bit because Drew had Bowen, Wagner, and a couple other people, and Schuler
We
below
had
that.
Wagner's number 8.
He had Clark higher
Yeah.
than any of us did. I had KVA the highest of anybody, because I used that drive MVP thing, and he was great against Penn State.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
had Schroth the highest out of all of us, a guy that mattered, pretty high on the list. So that's why I like these, and it'll be fun in the summer with the 4 of us. It's a lot harder to do the preseason one than the postseason one. So JB, you're back on for the not won't be as
Man,
busy for the for the
those
preseason. It's
those
tough. Just
those early ones when you're dealing a number 84,
yeah, you might be
you
dealing
don't
number 105 this year. So
yeah,
that
you
could be.
don't really know, you got an offensive lineman that hasn't played or hasn't even gotten here yet.
Right. We'll do a collection of walk-ons to start maybe the series and then move on to 85 or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
along those
So
lines.
anyway, Great House 10, Schuler 9. I'm sorry, John.
No, no, no.
Wagner 8, Bowen 7, Kaiser 6.
I didn't know you were going 10 through 6 there. I was just going to say, was some love character unanimous number 1, or was that a real controversial vote
He
there?
It
was
was
he He was not unanimous.
Yeah, Tim and I had him 1, and Drew had Watts 1 and Love 2, and Tim and
Oh,
I both
okay.
had Watts 2.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
we had the
And
same.
then,
I was the only outlier. I had Jack Kaiser 5 and Mills 6. Everybody else had the same people in the top 5.
and I
Otherwise,
guess
I mean, Mills did miss the 3 most important games of the
right.
season.
And
That's
Love
why.
was hurt for the last 3 games really and didn't produce much. So I can understand why Drew would have picked Watts
Well, he produced
number
pretty well
one.
in the Penn State game.
Well, there's
Well, and
not.
he produced. I mean, he
That's
produced
right.
the defining moment in the
Yeah,
first ever home playoff game at Notre Dame as well.
right.
Yeah, I met Georgia and of
Oh
course the
yeah,
last game
of course.
against Ohio State. But yeah, so Mills was actually we had a tie. Mills and Leonard Moore.
All right.
I had Mills 4. I probably should have had Moore 4 at number 4
Yeah,
because
I had Leonard 3. Pretty easy 3 for me was Riley Leonard. I saw. I don't know who said it. It's a longtime poster, and I won't say that. I don't remember the name. That's why I'm not saying the name. Saying that he didn't believe Riley Leonard should be anywhere near that high, and I just think that's completely false over the course
I
of the
agree with
season. And the
you.
coaching staff would maybe say you guys are all wrong, and Riley Leonard's number 2 and number 1, and Xavier Watts is. I don't know. Love Watts and Leonard. Anybody could have said any of those things, and I would not have blinked. I'd have blinked if you said Mills, Kaiser, or Moore is number 1 over those guys, but those other
Right.
3 guys are great. But Riley Leonard's toughness and
Well,
ability to run the football
he's
dragged them through.
a quarterback, and I mean, he almost rushed for 1,000 yards. I realized he had
He
16
did in
games,
terms
but
without sacks. He
Yeah,
was
right,
well over.
yeah, I was
exactly.
going to
Yeah,
say he
no,
did gain more than 1,000 yards rushing. He was almost at 2,900 yards passing. I mean, the guy had almost 4,000 yards of offense, but behind an entirely rebuilt and revamped offensive line that then still had to shuffle as the season went along. And so I think when you go back and watch some more of this Notre Dame season, as you look to cling to football with the Super Bowl now also in the rear view, as you watch more of Notre Dame's magical run, I think and hope there will be a better appreciation for what Riley did because, yeah, he missed some wide open throws, but he made a lot of chicken salad when there was not the right ingredients for chicken salad.
Exactly. And guys, think about this. Like, all right, so sometimes you have a great passing immobile quarterback who, well, he could have escaped and gotten 10 yards there, but he can't run. Yeah, but he makes all the throws. Well, he didn't get the 10 yards he should have gotten when he could have run. Like it
no,
all
it's true.
counts. It's
The other thing is he carried, I believe, 184 times, one fumble. Now
yeah.
we're talking about
It was a 44-yard gain when he fumbled
right,
too.
exactly. This is a guy that touched the football a ton, and he had one fumble. Was it end up being 7 interceptions? I
7 or
think
8. I think 8.
yeah,
I think 8.
maybe it was 8.
And
But
also, guys, we have to change the NCAA with the stupid college rule, what they still call sacks, loss of rushing yards. Come on, it's a passing play nowadays. The NFL does it right. It's
Yeah.
not a that's a rule from 100 years ago that they have
Yeah.
rushing yards that goes against the quarterback when it's
it
sacked.
really is. I still think that they should go back and amend if you're going to include bowl games now, you need to go back and amend all the stats. I
I
guess
mean, I
that'd be
could do that
right.
for. I know Notre Dame's easier because they only played in 10 bowl games, 12 bowl games before they started doing the stats because
Yeah.
they didn't go to bowls. I could do that in a summer on like a day off if they paid me lunch and dinner at Notre Dame to give them all the bowl stats right there. It's not
They
anybody could do this at any school.
they might Alan Wazalewski may take you up on that,
It's going to
although
be a really nice lunch and a really nice dinner. But
he really enjoys doing that work too. So you may have to wrestle that away from him. Guys, anything else? Segment 1?
I think O'Malley's just trying to get lunch and dinner at Roars if I'm reading the room correctly.
yeah,
I
I missed that opportunity once last week. So
Don't do it again. We'll be back. Coming up, segment 2, burning up the boards.
we are back with segment 2, burning up the boards. Our first question from Irish Fly 3R. Rank these 4 games from most likely to lose to least likely. He has Miami on the road, Texas A&M at home, at Arkansas, USC at home. And then he adds, do you agree, or maybe do you agree with the sentiment Notre Dame can lose only one of these games to make the playoff?
I thought these were pretty good. I mean, I thought that it was a fairly challenging ranking. And I settled upon the order that they're in. Miami 1, Texas A&M 2, because of having beaten them and knowing what A&M has coming in from the portal. Arkansas 3, USC 4. What say you guys?
I like this question. So who do we say asked this one? Irish Fly 3R.
3R. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's Irish Flyer, and it's just a clever way of spelling it. I'm not
I
sure.
think you're right. I think you're right.
Kudos Irish Flyer. Really, really like that question. I would go with Miami number one because all the pressure in the world really is going to be on Miami, and this is a really pivotal year for Mario Cristobal and company, and they've retooled their staff some. They made some splashy hires. They obviously have spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million on their new quarterback, who will be coming back from injury. So I would have Miami number one, to be honest with you, and then I'm probably going Arkansas number two.
You've been
Uh,
there, so you got a better perspective on the
I am too.
environment.
Yep.
Well, and they do bring back Taylor Green. I wasn't certain of that the other night,
Yeah.
or the last time we discussed them and did our podcast. I would, but speaking of night, I would wholly expect that to be a night kickoff. And that place is a good atmosphere at night when they're calling the Hogs and you're getting that Woo Pig Suey, and that's early enough in the season for Arkansas. Let me just look at their schedule real quickly to see. So I've got that one and two. And then I would say I probably would put USC number three and A&M number four because I just think that USC showed some stuff down the stretch. They've been active in the portal. They're going to continue to be active probably in the April portal. But again, I think there's a big split there between the possibility of Notre Dame losing at Miami and Arkansas, pardon, versus the possibility of Notre Dame losing at home to USC and A&M, especially USC because it's so much deeper into Notre Dame. And I think Notre Dame will really have found its footing and should be playing behind an extremely excellent and coalesced offensive line at that point. Presumably, your starting quarterback will have really found his footing by that point in time. So I think there's a big difference between the likelihood of a loss with Miami. And I think Miami is a clear-cut number one. And then maybe Notre Dame could lose any one of those other three games, but I also think Notre Dame could win all three of those other three games. Looking at Arkansas's schedule, they've got a money game against FCS, Bama, A&M, then Arkansas State and Butch Jones. That should be a win. They do have a tough contest at home against Ole Miss on the 13th, and then Memphis will be no slouch. So Arkansas is going to find a whole lot out about itself from September 13th through December or through October 11th. Listen to this stretch, guys. Ole Miss, Memphis, Notre Dame, and Tennessee. And then the next week they got Texas A&M. Now, that's really significant. So, yeah, they've got some work to do, and that the Ole Miss and Memphis games are on the road for them. So very, very significant. But that's a long-winded answer. Miami, I think, is the most likely loss of the four. The others are kind of a toss-up, but I'd have Arkansas number two, USC number three, and A&M number four. A&M just lost so much.
Miami's number one with a bullet for me because that's either CJ Carr's first start or Steve Angeli's second start. And Miami's crowd for Notre Dame is like a hornet's nest. It's the same thing as going to Tennessee for Notre Dame and Arkansas for Notre Dame because Miami hates Notre Dame with a passion, and the 2017 crowd was bloodthirsty, wild. They're amazing when Notre Dame comes in, and they're terrible when anybody else is there. So Miami's number one. Arkansas is number two for me, the road environment. Number three for me is right after Arkansas, Boise State, because I think that's the letdown game of the season right there. And Boise State comes into South Bend, and you have a very hard game after playing at Arkansas and having Texas A&M a couple weeks prior. I get your point about USC, JB. I was tight. I think Notre Dame's offensive line and team by that point is better off, so I'm going A&M after Boise State, and then USC. And speaking of schedules, I took a quick peek. USC hosts Michigan before Notre Dame, so that's a nice, fun, physical battle they have to go through. But before that, USC has to fly out after two easy ones early, home games. They fly to Purdue, come back to play Michigan State. They fly back to the Midwest to play Illinois, come back and play Michigan. They fly back to the Midwest to go play Notre Dame, and then they fly back out to play Nebraska. I bet you they love that travel schedule compared to what they used to do.
That's one of those, at the end of the year, they show the graphic of how many miles that they've flown. And I didn't check the schedules of these teams, and so that's obviously very important. Couple things. Boise State. I'm doing the stories on the transfer portal. I was, and I know like a lot of our several of our subscribers responded to this. Boise State signed only 7 guys, and they are all of them are virtually uh, non-FBS guys moving up to FBS or reclamation projects. I'm just surprised that they didn't do better in the portal, considering they were a bye team in the playoffs. So I don't know. I know they have. I saw listed 6 offensive starters and 9 defensive starters coming back, but I was surprised by that. The other thing, JB, the other day you mentioned who might compete with Marcel Reed as the starting quarterback at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
That is Jacob Zeno from UAB, who has thrown 628 passes in college for nearly 5,000 yards, completed 69% of his passes, 32 touchdowns. You ding him for the 18 interceptions. He suffered a season-ending non-throwing shoulder injury this past season, but I assume that's who you were talking about, Jacob Zeno, coming from UAB.
Yeah, I was talking about him for sure, and then the young kid that they got out of Florida. O'Malley had his name for me last week, but he's the consensus 4-star who reclassified, who should be finishing his junior year of high school right now in Florida, and instead
Oh,
got
right,
a
right, right.
very lucrative NIL deal and graduated early and enrolled at Texas A&M last month. And then one real quick note in cleaning up about Arkansas, because I think this is pertinent. Their defensive coordinator. Travis Williams, was very briefly involved in the Ohio State defensive coordinator search, and really had Ohio State interviewed him earlier in the process, I think it might have ended up going more in that direction, or maybe a co-defensive coordinator for him. But as we were checking on that at Football Scoop, I reached out to some of my people at Arkansas. They made a really heady point that I think applies here. And they said, John, every year he's been our defensive coordinator, we've lost fewer and fewer defensive guys in the portal. More people are staying, and these guys play their bleeps off for him. So I do think the fact that Arkansas hung on to him this week is really good news for the Razorbacks, and not as good a news for the people that are looking to knock off the Hogs this fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to Martin Evenflow. Is there any thought regarding Steve Angeli being the starter at the beginning of the season and going to CJ Carr, similar to 2018 with Brandon Wimbush to Ian Book? I'm for sticking with whomever wins the job out of camp, but there has to be some trepidation about starting Carr with 0 meaningful snaps in that house of horrors. Notre Dame, of course, defeated Penn State there, but as you pointed out, Tim, completely different atmosphere as to what
Yeah,
awaits
that'd
Notre
be a
Dame
little
then.
different crowd.
Yeah.
Actually, this was almost a Monday musing, as I could see this happening. Steve Angeli starting at Miami,
Mhm.
or being
I,
prepared to start
I
at
mean, I
Miami.
don't
I
think
mean, this is this it's that's going to be a hard.
that wasn't the plan in 2018. I mean, like
No,
we're
I
we're
think
gonna
what they're saying was Chip Long wanted Book. Brian Kelly wisely overturned him for Michigan and said, "I don't care.
okay,
Wimbush is
fair
going to win
enough.
this game for us." And then Wimbush didn't get any better. I mean, Wimbush, all-time great Notre Dame teammate, but they almost lost to
Man,
Vanderbilt and played
can
too
you
close to Ball State
can
because of
you
it.
can you remember a quarterback that saw the field downfield worse than
No, yeah,
than
he
Brandon
was.
Wimbush? He just didn't see it. It just
I could see this happening with Steve Angeli.
yeah.
I'm not saying it will, but I understand if CJ Carter does it, if he wins the job by a kind of a little bit, then I think it could happen with Angeli. If he wins the job by a ton, you just go with CJ
Yeah.
Carter.
What do you think, John?
What I would point to is, and it's one of the elements that I think is Marcus Freeman has honed and developed in his coaching skill set, is we know he's going to play exactly the guy who earns the job, who wins the job. And we saw it when we were getting stunned after Jagasaw was injured on the 3rd day of camp last year, and we thought it would default to Tosh Baker. And then 10 days later, all the whispers were how Anthony Knapp was coming on strong and was going to dethrone him. And so I could see the scenario of Angeli, because he's just frankly had a lot more reps and been in the program obviously much longer. Now they're both on level footing for how long they've been in Mike Denbrock's offense.
Right.
But then within that, CJ Carr was not healthy for a great portion of that time. I know we've got a question coming up on that. I'll just go ahead and tease it. Say, I am told that he's incredibly close to right at 100%, was basically 100% by the end of the playoff run.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in a second. But Tim, anything further on that?
I don't. I if it's a close race, Steve Angeli would probably be pretty poised in that situation. If CJ Carr just completely beats out Steve Angeli in the spring, there's no point in really going into that. I
Yeah,
don't think.
man, you sure would love to see. You sure would love to see quarterbacks actually compete through a spring because
Well, I think they will. I think these three are really.
I'm saying actually us
Oh,
witness
so,
it.
yeah. I was gonna say, Tim, I think if they don't do that, Marcus is doing something very wrong.
I want to no, I want to see it. I want to
Yeah,
see
okay.
it.
I get it. I think you should see it too. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, you just have such a better understanding of the decision making process. But John, I think you make a good point because I think that absolutely the best guy, if they determine that he was the best guy on the practice field, they go with him.
Well, Pendleton out of nowhere. What was Pendleton
Pendleton,
taking
yeah.
snaps at
I
guard?
mean,
We were like, what is going on here?
we assume not having seen Rod Hurd the second in the spring, we assume that he would be the starter. And Mike Mickens did not assume that he would be the starter, and Adon Schuler was. We move on to my good friend from the West Coast, Glasses Ref. In the unfortunate scenario where both Angeli and Minchie leave Notre Dame this April, could you see a pathway for Tyler Buckner to return to the quarterback position? He would be very effective in the red zone. I think we've talked about this a little bit.
I mean, if
Yeah,
both,
I could,
yeah, go ahead,
I
JB.
could see that pathway. Yeah, for sure. I could see that pathway. I could also see Notre Dame suddenly in that same 10-day portal window, April 16th through the 25th, also being in the market for a backup quarterback at that point in time. So, yeah, I could see that. Look, they obviously trust him. They grew his role even on gimmick and gadget plays. So there was great trust there in Buckner and what he could supply to the team. And, I think his teammates enjoyed being around him. And there was a playoff game. I can't remember which one it was. It might have been the Orange Bowl. I can't even recall. But I just happened to look over and see some guys sitting around Buckner on the bench, and you could just tell they were just in a comfortable environment being around one another. Yeah. So I absolutely could see that scenario under those variables.
I had a great interview with him in New Orleans. I'm Tim, I'm sorry I'm jumping ahead of you here, but
no, I remember. And I'm glad you waited to publish that great interview with him in New Orleans for the right time.
Yeah, you kept
as well.
saying, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Wait till the season's over. And it was well received. But really, and I asked him about moving back quarterback, and he was diplomatic about it. And I think Marcus Freeman, when he was first approached about it in May, he just didn't want to unsettle the quarterback room. My point being, is there really any reason why Tyler Buckner can't just move back to quarterback?
Right.
Well, not right now with the four guys there, I probably wouldn't bother with that because you're not doing scout.
Okay, no, that's fair.
After the spring, I would think he will.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think after the spring, well, one's leaving. One person's going to leave that doesn't get the second quarterback job. I mean, Notre Dame is well prepared for that. That's not me speculating. Notre Dame knows a person's going to leave, whoever doesn't win job number 2. Buckner would move in, but I agree with John. They will go if both leave, Angeli and Minchie, they will go portal, one guy. And if they and Buckner will still move to the room because Buckner can add value to the room. But I think they want a number 2. Buckner in the red zone is not Buckner, the number 2 quarterback for Notre Dame trying to go to the playoffs against this schedule. I think Buckner could help out in the red zone, and he should be the red zone. He could be a red zone quarterback, but he's not the starting quarterback in Notre Dame if you're going to the playoffs. So I absolutely think they'll go to the portal if those 2 guys leave.
Is there anyone less disruptive than Tyler Buckner?
No, he's a great teammate. He should move there once one guy leaves, but I don't see the point having 5 QBs in the spring room.
No, you're right. You're right about that. But that will change. Yes, no doubt. A couple questions here. I'm going to throw it to JB. The first one from SF Castillo. Can you detail the role that Zaire Turner played in the football department and how Marcus Freeman sees her replacement's new role? And then from Irish Hog, do you have any insight on how the dual hire for GM, which is being reported, will shake out? Are Marcus Freeman and Pete Bavacco kind of looking for 1, a talent evaluator, and 2, more of an executive to lead the entire offense and deal with money/NIL?
Yeah, so on Zaire Turner, if I'm not mistaken, she originally was hired away from Virginia Tech to Notre Dame. I think she was a hire from Chad Bowden maybe about 2 years ago, as he was able to grow that department a little bit, and then she grew her responsibilities. She left as director of player personnel. In a lot of ways, she really was a critical recruiting component. She had some of the strongest relationships with the families, especially when they came to campus, and wrote about this in December on Football Scoop, and that was she was trusted enough by this coaching staff that as they logged their playoff run and coaches had to stay on campus, but it was a live period for recruiting. They sent Zaire Turner out on the road recruiting in place of coaches. There was a week where I think maybe Dealin was the only coach that they felt good or was in a position to go out on the road recruiting, and then they sent Chad Bowden, Zaire Turner, Caleb Davis, Carter Almond, and maybe even Becca Seitz as well. And so she became, honestly, a bit of a Swiss knife, a Swiss utility tool. She did a lot, but she was really critical in the relationships and in the on-campus recruiting environment and being a resource for the family. She was not involved as much in the player eval or determining who to offer or anything like that. But then she would be, once they made those offers and they were recruiting somebody, she would help keep the coaches in line and have them scheduled of when they were making calls, when they should expect calls from those prospects, when they should be on the phone with commitments. And again, they trusted her enough to send her out on the road as one of their accountable recruiting coaches, which means she had to, not only did Notre Dame have to get a waiver, but it also means she had to pass the NCAA test to be eligible to be an ambassador of Notre Dame out on the road recruiting. The GM role, again, we noted earlier, hoping to have more on this a little bit later today on Football Scoop, but they've hosted a top candidate from the NFL the past couple of days on campus, had a bunch of meetings, and it obviously if you're going to the NFL, you're looking for someone in that more traditional pro GM role where you will analyze the roster, you'll be in charge of the money, you'll be looking at how to construct and potentially deconstruct the roster when the time comes. And it will be more of the traditional pro sense. And then the DPP, they thought they were going to have Kenyatta Watson on campus. He's elite. He's at Auburn right now. Really, they're number two, but he's one of the best recruiting and personnel guys anywhere in the SEC. Runs super deep in Atlanta. Been at Florida State. Been at Georgia Tech. They thought they were going to have him on campus at the same time they were bringing their GM candidate on campus. Kenyatta elected not to take the trip. He said that he's still considering Notre Dame, but when a guy cancels a trip with his wife, that's kind of like recruiting. You don't expect the commitment to come at that point in time.
Oddly, I remember when Zaire Turner got the job, that she had a unique story. She was out of football for 2 years. I think it was because of COVID. She was at Virginia Tech until 2020 summer, and I assume left because they didn't know if they'd be playing football when that's going on. But she was like an account manager at a communications firm and was a patient care coordinator at some other stuff. So she obviously has a pretty diverse background in terms of communication, organization, all that. But she was out of football for, I should say you're out of football because obviously COVID had something to do with it, but from 2020 to 2022 and a half when she joined Notre Dame, and she came on as recruiting. And of course, as JB said, her role escalated after, I
That's
don't know
man,
I
that's
don't remember what her recruiting role was. It was probably director of recruiting something, but that's, I don't know what that means.
that's
Um,
incredibly
yeah,
impressive, man. That is
yeah,
really
she was out.
impressive.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
assume out of football is because of COVID,
And
but
of course, I grew up in the sport as a reporter. The concept of a female player personnel director, I mean that never ever would have happened decades ago. So very good for her. Very, very impressive.
if I could just really quickly add, Tom Loy also obviously been all over the Kenyatta news, and Eric Thomas, as I talked with him this week, reminded me that Notre Dame had recruited Kenyatta's son, Kenyatta Jr., who was a consensus four-star who ended up beginning his career at Texas. And then I did know that he finished his career at Georgia State after he initially transferred back to Georgia Tech. He's looked at as a potential sixth or seventh round draft pick in the upcoming 25 NFL draft. and then, or maybe an undrafted free agent guy. But I bring him up because Kenyatta has another son who's just a sophomore at Grayson High School, and I know the listeners of this podcast are really informed listeners, so they know Grayson is an absolute football factory. Pumps out usually a dozen or so SEC Power Conference players every single year. So that is another factor with Kenyatta. When you hear the family stuff this time, that is a real factor because he can see a lot of his son's games at Grayson if he's still at Auburn.
Our next question from Annie Davis. You or Chris Ash, who are the 3 to 4 players on defense you point to as your core to build around? And Annie Davis wants to make a 2-year outlook here. So we're not just looking to survive 2025. You're looking at a 2-year thing.
The first 2 guys that come to mind are Drake Bowen and Adon Schuler for me.
I like that. Those are, I'll just give you my 4.
Yeah, I was going 4. I cheated and did 4.
Yeah. I'll just, Drake Bowen was instantly my number 1. Adon Schuler, I think, was my number 2. Leonard Moore, probably my number 3. And then Boubacar Traore is who I look for my number 4 in that group. Now, Boubacar's obviously got to be healthy, but that gives you all the levels. You have a safety that you trust in the back end to be your eraser. You have a guy that is emerging, already getting preseason 25 All-American honors in Leonard Moore, already ended up as one of the highest rated DBs in all of college football in 24 as a true freshman. Then you got Drake Bowen, who's probably going to be your green dot. And then you got Boubacar Traore, who I think before he got injured, we all wondered if this coming 25 season might be his last season at Notre Dame.
Yeah. It's not too early to build around Bryce Young, is it?
Yeah, I had my Bryce Young is my 4th. I had number 1 is KVA for me. I would build around Kingston Billy Amuasa as my defense. The red dot on your sweater, green dot on your helmet. Drake Bowen is number 2, and Adon Schuler has proven himself already. But I would add Bryce Young, and for Leonard Moore, I just put Leonard Moore on Leonard Moore Island over there and let everybody have no fun on the boundary, and you can build around that too. So you go ahead, throw it to the boundary and find out what happens. Yep.
Yeah, that's my point. Like you take away a side of the field.
You like shutting down one half the field, John? That's a good idea to build around that.
I like that.
What an incredible talent! What a great freshman year for that young man. Question from Murph JD, is CJ Carr going to be full go for spring camp? I would think it is crucial. All quarterbacks on the roster have an opportunity to give it their best shot in the spring due to the way the portal works. Of course, no contact for the quarterback. So, JB, there's no reason to believe he's going to be limited.
Correct. And I asked multiple staff members during the playoff run, like, hey, questions everywhere. Where is CJ Carr? How close is he to 100%? And a couple of the answers were really close, and he's basically 100%. And then I watched him, and you could see over the evolution of the month-long playoff run, he was a lot better in warm-ups in those last 2 games with how he was throwing the football, his velo, the distance that he was throwing the football, the routes that they were finally letting him throw that he had not been throwing 4 to 6 weeks earlier. So, again, they've got a staggered, rotating sort of off-season training program, getting them ready for spring camp. But the belief is he's going to be full go.
I watched Carr throw for all 20 minutes before the national championship game because I decided to spend my entire time on the field down there before being banned forever while we come back upstairs for Notre Dame games. CJ Carr was firing the ball before the national championship game. He did not do any of that stuff at the USC game. It's the best way to put it. That's the easiest way to. Now I watched him against USC pregame for a minute, but he would step back and not do the warm ups. He was in a regimen. He was still using something to strengthen his arm to be clear during the national championship pregame, but he was throwing 25-yard outs with plenty of zip. He did a full workout. He was out there before everybody else, along with Rocco Spindler, to see if Spindler can make himself walk through the pain. Those guys are out there doing a full workout.
I think I don't remember at what point during the playoffs, but we started seeing him throw some deep outs, and he was firing the ball. It's one of the prettiest balls you're ever going to see in the air. I mean, it's really, really impressive, and he's not going to take any contact, so I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be able to unleash it in about 4 weeks.
Not going to take any contact this time, right? That'd be a bad idea.
Well, that's the plan anyway. Question from CMU Pens fan. What was the moment in the past season when you realize that Marcus Freeman had graduated out of beginner coach mode and had become the man the program needed and wanted. I'm not sure for me there was a moment
I don't have
per
a moment
se.
for these things. I mean, it was in the postseason because you can say anything you want, but if they would have lost to USC out there in that situation, everybody been mad at Freeman, even though he still did a good job. Uh, Beginner coach mode, you wouldn't think of anything until Georgia Tech because they had just lost to Northern Illinois. I mean that you couldn't. Let's not rewrite history here. Beating Stanford doesn't take you out of beginner coach mode and you lose to Northern Illinois. I don't think he was beginner coach mode anyway. So I'm either going to say Texas A&M when he went down there and won that game, or during the playoff run when he became obviously the best Notre Dame coach since Lou Holtz to guide Notre Dame through that playoff.
Yeah, for me, A&M was a significant moment, and then you obviously had the backslide
Yeah.
next week against NIU. I probably put a little bit more into the Purdue win because it was so early in the season. It was a road game, and I thought we saw a true identity begin to form around the team that day because they just completely pounded Purdue into the turf of their own field despite a number of injuries, and they kept foot down, foot on the neck, foot on the gas pedal, whatever phrase you want to use there. And then the Louisville game was a big game for me. Louisville was undefeated. You had Lou Holtz in the stadium. It was a high pressure game for Notre Dame at that point. That to me was a real inflection point of the season because if you lose that game, you're done. You're cooked.
Yeah.
And that was a real challenge. And that ended up being a 7-point game that I don't think after that flurry, any of us really thought Notre Dame was truly threatened. It got hairy in the second half, but those are the moments for me. And then the playoff run, again, the way this team overcame injuries, the way this team maintained its selfless approach, the fact that team glory became not just Marcus Freeman's phrase, but something we heard every week inside the IAC.
Tim, I want to interrupt you real fast. They would not have won that Penn State game under anybody except for Marcus Freeman in the last since Lou Holt. They would not since 1993. That they should not have beaten Penn State as broken as they were in that game. And Penn State played great. They were just as physical in taking it to Notre Dame. It's an incredible effort that Notre Dame beat Penn State.
Bigger, stronger, faster, fresher. That's sure what it looked like, and Notre
Yeah.
Dame turned it all around. John, I think you make a good point about Purdue. Not that I would pick that game is when I thought that about Marcus Freeman, but Tim, I think you were there. Maybe you were too, John, when Mike Denbrock said, we went to Purdue. I think it was Mike Denbrock. We went to Purdue and we didn't have any idea what we had. I mean,
Yeah,
that
it
was
doesn't
the
sound
fun,
like Al Golden, so it was probably Mike
right?
Denbrock.
I mean, and of course you were coming out of Northern Illinois. I wouldn't pick the A&M game because they were so geared up for that one moment. Obviously, they weren't ready to play the next week against Northern Illinois. So for me, that game would be Georgia because I thought, and I credit Marty Biaggi too. I mean, from the opening series when Notre Dame's roughing the punter, and on the second one, Kirby Smart doesn't want another punt because he's concerned about it being blocked. Notre Dame was already in his head in that game, and I thought Notre Dame outcoached Georgia. How often do you say that about a Kirby Smart coach team?
Yeah.
But the no doubt about it was Penn State. Question from Scott F5. Tell us something interesting or unexpected that happened this season during the title run that was not made public. Did an unexpected player or coach deliver a powerful speech? Any unusual mind game or tactics used?
I mean, you guys just alluded to the Penn State game, and I don't know if it's been previously discussed or not discussed. I can't keep up with all of it, but there was Marcus Freeman was running hot after the James Franklin press conference. That's probably the best way to put it. I know the words.
Yeah, that was it though. That's the word.
Yeah, I know.
JB, you're totally right.
Yeah,
I know the words. I know the message that he delivered to his team when he got back to their headquarters that day and prepared for practice. I guess that was maybe 2 days before the game, and that's the moment. That's the moment. And to your all's point, they took Georgia's lunch 10 days before, especially what Al Golden did to Mike Bobo. It was more pronounced than what Al Golden did to Colin Klein to open the season, and then what Marty Biaggi did to them as well. And then on top of that, yeah, it's how mad Marcus Freeman was how much his players absorbed that, especially as they continued to see the clips on ESPN and on Twitter. And in a lot of ways, that and the sheer will to win are what carried Notre Dame to that monumental victory against Penn State.
That was like the least kept secret in the history of semifinal games. We got texts about it, then our colleagues got texts about it, our colleagues got texts about it. I was like, well, this seems like it's true because there's no one in the world that wasn't telling people Marcus is hot. Marcus is really mad at this. And I like to think that he listened to our he watched our pregame instant analysis for 5 seconds. I think he
He
maybe
did. He
got the
walked right
point where
by.
I said that he should be mad at James Franklin because I found it wildly offensive how the whole thing went down. So
Uh, again, some clarification because what pissed him off to begin with was the guy with the great voice that was up there at the dais with the two head coaches, and
Don something.
yeah, and they were wasting, and again, I referred to the Sun Bowl the year before when Marcus Freeman feels like pregame preparation is being compromised. And so that was the first thing he got upset with, because here he is, the coach of Notre Dame, getting ready to play against Penn State to get to the national title, and he's listening to instructions as to where the media needs to go
Where the
for
media is
dinner
going to
that
go for
night.
dinner. Yeah, it was a good dinner though. He could have. It was a really good dinner.
It
To be
was
honest.
good. I do. I mean, I and understand this is what coaches do. I get it. I manufactured so many motivational talks. That was a bit manufactured. I mean, was James Franklin? Was he really being?
Yeah, I was. What Tim? You remember? I said it before the thing. I was like, I cannot believe he said all those things about Marcus Freeman, and I said it before our
You
instant
did.
analysis. I
You
said it
did.
immediately. I was.
I didn't take it that way, but obviously he did, and it's a great manufactured moment for a coach to go back who was ticked off anyway because he was sitting up there listening to the guy with the velvet voice giving instructions to the media.
He has a good
So
voice too.
it just just it tripped the trigger, and he went for it, and that's what coaches do. Great
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, I thought it was a combination of the thing. The Marcus Freeman really took a personal affront to the comments about his age and his hairline. But let's not forget how much time James Franklin spent talking about how much Notre Dame needed to be playing in a conference
Oh yeah,
and that it
That
could all be
that was
Now that would
uniform
yeah, that
and
would
all of
piss me
that.
off.
So I thought it
Who
all
the
tied
hell?
in
Who
together.
is?
But it was one of those looked like the big brother little brother moment when big brother deep down realized little brother's surpassed me. And that's how I took it. And then Marcus Freeman got really ticked off and let his players know he was really ticked
How
off.
does it? How does a coach say, "I think all teams should be required to be in a conference"? What the hell? What are you talking about?
I think all teams should be required not to be in a conference, and I have the exact same viewpoint James Franklin does. We're both wrong. We have no idea what we're talking about. I don't, and he doesn't.
And
By the way, independence is the way to go. Want to point that out. Independence Day, my favorite headline of the year. And we had a colleague who I never took for being a home run hitter like this, but he told me on the media bus, Franklin stopped just short of patting Marcus on the head during that during that
that's fair.
co-press
No,
conference.
that's fair. That's fair. I just, I said this before about the time Notre Dame was playing Penn State. Uh, Penn State they'd still be independent too if they didn't have to join a
Yes, you
conference.
did. That's great. Yeah, they're only
I
not
mean,
independent because they had to join.
they clung to their independence the way Notre Dame did, and they were always, they always felt like they were being slighted because there were years where they were when Penn State had a really good record and Notre Dame maybe wasn't as an extra loss or two back in the old ratings days when you could go to bowls with lesser records. But hell, they would be independent if that was still feasible for them, and it wasn't.
I have a message for Texas. Join Notre Dame in independence, and together you will rule the universe. That's all you got to do right there. Independence is the way to go in the future. Sunny B 2475. Does the Irish Illustrated staff think that this edition of Notre Dame football is on a sustained level of excellence that can be like last year's team, a playoff level squad?
Yeah.
You know what? I do because now on the level, I don't think next year's squad. I would be incredibly stunned for next year's squad to play for a national championship. I would not be stunned for next year's squad to be earning a bid to the college football playoff. I just think as long as they stay healthy and settle on the right pieces and flow to the offensive line, that they're going to have a really elite college football offensive line with multiple guys on that line who will get a chance to play in the pros. You're going to have the best running back in all of college football, and one of the best running backs, I would contend. I think Jeremiah Love is on a running back plane at the college level similar to Reggie Bush. Like right now, he's not in LA getting the attention that Bush did, but when you see what Jeremiah Love does, he reminds me of Reggie Bush. He's probably the first person I've said that about. I've seen some great running backs, and somebody asked me to outline those on a previous pod, and I did. But yeah, then you got Schuler back, who's going to be a preseason All-American safety, and Leonard Moore, who's preseason All-American corner, and you love the linebacker core. And yeah, there's a big question mark at quarterback, but there's a question mark of who it will be and how he will handle it. It's not a question mark of how bad is he going to be, because I think there's a lot of belief in all those guys on the roster. So that's my answer. It's probably again too long-winded. I'm going to work on that, I promise. But that's my answer.
It's February. You can talk forever, John. It's February. It's not Irish Illustrated overtime at 2 a.m. You can talk all you want in February.
Do I think that Notre Dame's on a sustained level of excellence? Yes, but I agree with John. I mean, we talked about this the other day. The loss of leadership to serve as captains or leaders otherwise is significant. So, every team is different. Like there was a stretch for 3 years where it didn't matter. I mean, Georgia just kept spitting out NFL players. Notre Dame doesn't have a conveyor belt like that, like Georgia did through that, 21 through 23. So you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to adapt with a new quarterback. You're going to have to, I mean, Notre Dame's usually great at tight end. I don't know that they're going to be great at tight end. Offensive line, certainly. Interior defensive line, that needs to be answered. I think they're on a sustained level of success because that's the culture that Marcus Freeman has created. But playing for the national title next year, there's a lot of growth that needs to happen. They'll grow. He's got it down. He knows what he's doing now, but it just doesn't have the leadership of a Watts and a Kaiser and a Mills, and we said over and over again, straight up the middle of the defense.
I'm glad this question popped up because it goes back to our top 50. I just told you guys that they do have 6 of the top 10, 12 of the top 20, 19 of the top 30, and 30 of the top 50 players we ranked from the season back,
returning,
which is
yes.
really, really good core. The one issue I have I don't think anyone would ever survive the injuries they survive. If they get that again, I don't think they'll make the playoffs. But the main reason I think it's tough to make the playoff again, this team coming back in 2025 would make the playoff for sure with no more than one loss if the point spreads pregame were 3-point underdogs, 28-point favorite, 10-point favorite, 27-point favorite, 7-point favorite, 23, 14, 14, 26, 20, 14, and 8. Those were their favorites last year. That will not be the case this year. It's a harder road to make the playoff. You can lose one more in theory.
Right. I think, for sure. We all felt unanimous that a 2-loss Notre Dame team would not have been invited into the 2024 playoffs.
You know what? Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think Notre Dame could absorb 2 losses in 25 and not only absorb 2 losses and potentially still be a playoff team. I think depending on the nature of 2 losses, Notre Dame could still be your 7 or 8 seed hosting at 10-2 in 2025. I really believe that because of the quality of the schedule.
That was actually part of the first question asked in this podcast, and I don't think we really answered that. But yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends upon obviously who the 2 losses would be to and what kind of seasons they had, and maybe some other team that went 11-1 and you're the one that beat them, or 10-2, what have you. Yeah, that's the way I look at it.
You guys want to have the point spread for Purdue again, -8? Want to go ahead and bet on that and go back in time and put how much money you want on that one? I also didn't know they're going to play with 10 guys. We did not know they'd play with 10 players. That was weird on film to see that. So I found that strange. But
Thieneman went to Oregon,
where they will use him inside the fabric of the defensive society, is what you're saying.
They'll find a way to effectively utilize his skill set.
Yes. From Dr. Parnell 42.
Wrapping up.
Tim Priester, did you ever pursue coaching college baseball prior to coaching high school baseball? Additionally, what would JB and Tio have done if you hadn't chosen this profession?
I, I wanted to be a sports writer, man. I mean, that was the only thing that was on my mind. Later in life, after I had established myself as a sports writer, I thought, what, you could, I think I could have done that. I think I could have made a profession out of it. How good I would have been, I don't know. But I think I could have made a profession out of it on the collegiate level. I always wanted Paul Maneri to ask me to be his assistant coach on the Rand baseball team, and I brought that up to him one time, and he literally laughed out loud. So that did not do anything for my confidence as to him wanting me to join him on the staff. But no, not when I was not. I wanted to be a sports writer. That was clear at a very early age. But later on, when I had some success coaching in high school, I thought, I could do this, but I don't know how. I don't know how good I would have been.
The best job I've ever had in the world was sideline reporter in the SEC for 2 years. Radio sideline reporter. This is a face for radio, and that's the best job I've ever had. I would leave everything I'm doing and go be a college football radio sideline reporter again. I loved it like you can't believe, even in 100+ degree temps and even in -0 or below zero temps for a game out in Columbia, Missouri a few years ago. So my dad was an investment banker. I started out as a business major and realized very quickly that a 9 to 5 job inside of a building and sitting at a desk might would have broken my spirit. Well, I'm not wired for that. Jess will laugh if I visit her in her office at Eddy Street Commons, and I'm like, you just sit in here all day. Like, what are you doing with yourself? So I need the variety. I need every day to be different. That's one of the things I liked about newspapers. A wise editor told me one time, like, the great thing about a newspaper is you start all over the next day, and every day is a new day. Every day in this job is a new day. But yeah, I'd give anything to be a sideline radio reporter again. And then completely off topic, but I switched hats today because I got some good natured ribbing for wearing the same hat on back-to-back podcasts earlier this week on Football Scoop and then on the Irish Illustrated Insider. And so I switched up hats today. That's for you, Joe Seiler.
JB, what was your best observation as a sideline reporter? Anything jump out?
What jumps out to me is Tennessee had a late lead at Florida in 2015 and hadn't won in Florida in a long time, hadn't beaten Florida, period, since 2004 and or 2006, yeah, 2004. And Tennessee scored late to go up 26-14. And I watched some people that are still in college football today, some people that now hold the general manager role for some FBS programs. I watched them tell Butch Jones, you got to go for two. You got to go for two. Butch Jones ignored their advice, kicked the extra point. Tennessee lost that game 28-27. That stood out to me. Another thing was Kurt Magid, who played quite a while in the NFL, played for the Colts. He got injured in the opening game that year. They played in the Titans Stadium. He got injured, and I just had the wherewithal to note at that point in time how long he was gone from the field, not how long he missed the game. He missed game time, but that, and then just some other things, some anecdotes of players on the sideline, players, Evan Berry saying he's getting ready to return a kickoff for a touchdown and then doing it. Josh Dobbs, some masterful things that he did. Juwan Jennings, the best thing I ever did was catch Juwan Jennings for an on-field interview after Tennessee walked off Georgia with that Hail Mary in 2016, and I'd known Juwan from recruiting, and I just pulled him to the middle of the field, like the producers were in my ear, like, you got to get him, you got to get him. And I said, Juwan, when did you know you were going to catch that ball? And he goes, as soon as it was in the air. And I'll remember that quote forever. And that's one of the signature plays in college football of this century.
I have
Heart
different
surgeon,
answers.
Tio?
I have
Heart
different
surgeon?
answers. No. I think probably being a basketball coach would have been something I would have liked to do. I'm glad I didn't, because to borrow from a former Notre Dame basketball coach, I think how I would treat some players nowadays would be like Ben Hansborough would have if he was back on one of those failing teams. He said he'd have him in the corner in a bloody mess, stabbing him out of hatred for how much he doesn't play hard enough. No, I wouldn't handle basketball nowadays like I could then. So college basketball's up there. I agree with John Bryce with not sideline reporter, but radio host. I think would be a fun job. I've always wanted to do that, be a sports radio host for football and basketball. Man, it's hard to watch basketball the way I used to, but so it'd have to be football nowadays. Sommelier would be one too. I always wanted to, that's
There you
something
go.
I found out later in life. Or I'd just be like Kane in Kung Fu and walk the earth.
Quite a white. That's you're covering the whole gamut there, Tio.
Or like
Renaissance man.
or like
Sounds
Fletch,
good.
I'm a shepherd. When somebody asks, "What do you do?" I'm a shepherd.
Uh, all of us come back to our fallback is something in sports. If I
Well,
hadn't
not
done
walking
this,
the earth, but yeah.
if I no, if I hadn't done this in sports, I would have done that in sports. What can we say? A couple, three jocks just doing what they do. All right, guys, we appreciate, and ladies, we appreciate you joining us today. We'll be back on Monday, February 17th for the next edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. Tim Priester, Tim O'Malley, John Bryce. This has been Irish Illustrated Insider.